They gave me a desk on the lower observation deck because nobody else wanted it. That was fine. I had a window. The Kethavar Rim was a joint species survey vessel, 6 Vethrani crew to my 1, which was the standard ratio for what the Vethrani Aerial Survey Commission called auxiliary environmental attachments. That was the official designation for what I did. Auxiliary environmental attachment. It meant I logged air. Commander Vethrani had explained this to me on my first day aboard, in the slow, careful tones one uses with someone who might not fully grasp the sophistication of the operation around them. The rim carried a full atmospheric sensor array, spectrographic, particulate density, chemical assay, thermal gradient mapping, all networked, all processed in real time, all feeding a navigational model that had guided Vethrani survey missions for 80 years without a single atmospheric incident. The system, she said, was considered definitive. I had nodded and asked where I could get a second notebook. She had looked at the first notebook. The Vethrani are avian in the broad sense, long-boned, feathered along the forearm ridges and the crest of the skull, with eyes that sit wide and forward and miss very little. Vethrani was senior survey grade, which meant her crest feathers were banded in the pale institutional gray of long service. She was not unkind. She simply could not fathom why anyone would write things down by hand that a sensor array had already measured, averaged, and filed in triplicate. I didn't try to explain it. I just asked about the notebook. Orev-Sath was the third moon on the survey pass, a low-gravity body with a dense lower atmosphere, tidally locked, the sun side running a permanent slow convection cycle that the Vethrani models had mapped extensively. Beautiful, in a way that a planet-sized slow boil can be beautiful when you're looking at it from above and not in it. The descent corridor for the survey pass ran through the mid-atmosphere band, which the rim's sensors had cleared as standard particulate density, negligible chemical variance, transit safe. The briefing was 17 minutes before descent. I was the only one in it who was not Vethrani, which meant I was the only one seated at the low end of the angled briefing table, which was designed for beings whose knees bend differently than mine. I had stopped mentioning this. Vethrani walked the corridor data on the forward display. Clean lines, clean numbers, everything inside survey tolerance. She was thorough and confident in the way of someone who has been thorough and confident for a very long time and has never had a reason to reconsider the combination. At the end, she nodded toward my notebook. The ambient log, she said, which was what they called it, standard clearance, Dr. Vore. This was the part where I was expected to confirm that my hand-recorded observations contained nothing that contradicted the sensor array. I opened the notebook to the Orev-Sath section. I had been logging the approach particulate readings for 11 days. The sensor array recorded particulate density as a single averaged figure, updated every 4 hours. My notebook had a reading every 40 minutes, because I had nothing else to do at the lower observation deck except watch the atmosphere and write down what I saw. This is not a skill. It is just patience and a window. The sensor array's figures for Orev-Sath's mid-atmosphere band were consistent, 4.2 micrograms per cubic meter, plus or minus 0.3, inside tolerance. My figures told a slightly different story. Not dramatically different. The average matched. But the individual readings had been climbing in a specific pattern over the last 6 days. Not randomly, not noise, but incrementally, in a slow biological rhythm I'd seen once before, in a post-mission debrief report on a different moon entirely. A report I had read because I read everything when I have a window and a notebook and nothing else to do. I looked at the display. I looked at my notebook. The sensor average is accurate, I said. The trend inside the average is not. Vethrani turned from the display. I showed her the notebook. Not the conclusion, the numbers. 48 individual readings, each one a little higher than the one before it, the curve gentle enough that a 4-hour average would flatten it entirely. She studied it for a moment. The survey tech at the end of the table, young, crest feathers still darkening into their adult banding, made a small sound that I had learned meant something like polite skepticism, expressed as a physical reflex. Vethrani handed the notebook back. The array is spectrographic, she said. If there were a chemical shift in the particulate composition, it would register. The composition hasn't shifted, I said. The density has. Very slowly. The array's averaging interval smooths it. To within tolerance. Yes, I said, to within tolerance. She looked at me, the way people look at someone who has just explained, at length, that they prefer to navigate by landmarks in an era of reliable satellite positioning. Patient. Faintly appreciative of the effort. Already moving on. Thank you, Dr. Vaur, she said. The corridor is clear. I took my notebook and went back to the lower observation deck. I kept logging. Not out of stubbornness. I logged because I had a window, and the window showed me Orev-Sath's upper atmosphere, and the upper atmosphere was doing what it had been doing for 6 days, thickening, very slightly, in a way that the sensor array was recording accurately and completely failing to find interesting. I had the post-mission debrief report more or less memorized by now. It concerned a survey vessel called the Vethrani Holding, 12 years ago, a different moon, different species aboard. The atmospheric incident had been logged afterward as a biological bloom event, a class of slow-cycle microbial mass that lived in certain dense lower atmospheres and periodically vented an aerosol compound that was, depending on the species in question, anywhere from mildly irritating to seriously problematic. The Vethrani Holding had caught the edge of one. The report was thorough. The post-incident atmospheric analysis had noted that the bloom was preceded by a density increase in the mid-atmosphere particulate of approximately 0.8 micrograms per cubic meter over a 6 to 8 day window. I looked at my notebook. I looked at the window. Then I put on my shoes and walked up to the bridge. The bridge of the HFY rim was designed for Vethrani ergonomics, which meant the ceiling was high and the floor was slightly convex, and all the workstations faced the same direction at a slight upward angle, as though the crew were perpetually scanning a horizon. Vethrani was at the central station. The descent corridor approach had begun. On the forward display, Orev-Sath filled the lower third of the frame. Slate blue atmosphere, slow white convection bands, entirely peaceful. I stood at the edge of the crew floor, which was where non-crew stood on the rim, and I waited for Vethrani to notice me. She noticed me. Dr. Vaur, the particulate density in the mid-atmosphere band is at 4.9 micrograms, I said. It was 4.2 when the corridor was cleared. That's a 4.7 increase in 11 days. The Vethrani Holding incident threshold was 0.8 over 6 to 8 days. She was quiet for a moment. Our sensors show 4.2, she said. Your sensors show a 4-hour average, I said. My last reading was 40 minutes ago. Another moment of quiet. The descent corridor was on the display. The rim was 3 minutes from the band entry point. I did not say anything else. I had said the thing. The notebook was in my hand if she wanted to look at it again. Vethrani looked at the display for a long moment. Then she looked at the survey tech. Then she said, very evenly, hold descent. Adjust corridor to upper band. Contingency track 4. The survey tech moved. The rim adjusted. Nobody said anything else for a while. The bloom opened across the original corridor 17 minutes after we would have entered it. The sensor array caught it then. The aerosol compound, fully vented. A full chemical signature registering across all spectrographic bands simultaneously. Unambiguous, impossible to miss, now that there was nothing subtle about it anymore. The display turned the corridor band a deep amber. Every chemical assay alarm on the bridge activated at once. For a corridor we were no longer in. Vethrani looked at the display for a while. Then she looked at me. How long have you been logging Orev-Sath? She said. 11 days, I said. She was quiet. Her crest feathers, I noticed, had gone very still, the way Vethrani feathers go still when they are processing something they would prefer not to have to process. The ambient log will be added to the mission record, she said, with full notation. All right, I said. The sensor averaging interval will be reviewed. That seems reasonable, I said. She looked at my notebook one more time. Then she looked at me. Is there anything you need, Dr. Vaur? I could use a new notebook, I said. This one's almost full. She arranged it. I went back to the lower observation deck and started on page 1. The air outside the window was a little clearer than it had been, or maybe the same. It was hard to tell from up here. That was, in a way, the whole point. I kept logging,